Good evening, dear friends, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. Wherever you're listening from tonight, maybe tucked safely under the blankets, curled up in your favorite quiet corner of the house, or perhaps lying somewhere peaceful, while the world slowly quiets down outside. I'm so happy you're here with me. Take a slow, gentle breath in. Let your shoulders soften and drop. Maybe pull the blanket or duvet up just a little higher, and allow the day to quietly drift away. London fog lay thick upon the city that December evening. At 221 B. Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, craving challenge. Then came the knock at the door. A young woman, drenched from the rain, burst in with news of her father's death. Mr. Reginald Hargrove found dead at his Mayfair residence, a pistol in his hand. Scotland Yard saw a simple suicide, driven by financial ruin. But Holmes saw a link. The powder burns absent from his temple. One link in a chain that would bind a killer. The game is afoot. Chapter 1. The First Link. I set down these events as they occurred in that dreary December of 1895, when the fog of London pressed thick against every pane, and the gaslights struggled to pierce the gloom. At 221 B. Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes had been idle for days, lounging in his armchair with steepled fingers under his chin, his Stradivarius untouched amid scattered chemical bottles. The coal fire crackled warmly in the grate, its heat pushing back the bitter chill that seeped through the cracks, while the faint, rich smell of his shag tobacco drifted from the Persian slipper on the mantel. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps echoed up the 17 stairs, just as Big Ben tolled 7 through the mist. She entered with a tray of steaming tea, the bitter aroma cutting through the tobacco haze. "A Miss Eliza Hargrove, gentlemen," she announced, her voice low with concern. She soaked through and quite beside herself. The young woman who followed was drenched, her woolen cloak dripping onto the worn carpet, rough under my boots as I rose. Rainwater glistened on her pale cheeks, framed by damp curls, and her gloved hands clutched a sodden newspaper that crinkled softly. Foghorns wailed distantly from the Thames, a mournful counterpoint to her trembling voice. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, "my father, Reginald Hargrove, has been found dead in his study this afternoon. The police call it suicide, but I know it cannot be so. He was never a man to despair." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with sudden interest. He gestured to the chair opposite, the smooth stem of his pipe cool in his hand as he drew upon it thoughtfully. The room filled with the acrid scent of burning tobacco, mingling with the damp fog clinging to her clothes. "Tell us everything, Miss Hargrove," he said calmly. "No detail is too small. Data, data, data. I cannot make bricks without clay." She accepted the hot tea, its bitter taste steadying her chilled fingers. Father was a spice merchant in the city, successful until recent troubles. This morning he received an urgent telegram and locked himself in his study. By afternoon, his valet Jenkins heard a pistol shot and forced the door. Father lay dead, weapon in hand, wound to the temple. But he hated firearms, Mr. Holmes. There was no note, no farewell. He was troubled by debts. Yes, but not broken. I glanced at Holmes, who now paced rapidly before the fire, his shadow leaping across the walls amid the crackling flames. The coal cobblestones outside echoed with passing footsteps, a reminder of the city's ceaseless life beyond our warm room. "The police see suicide from financial ruin," Holmes murmured. yet you see murder. Pray describe the household and his associates. Miss Hargrove spoke of her stepmother, Lady Hargrove, elegant and reserved. The ambitious partner, Victor Langford. Loyal valet Jenkins, rival merchant Silas Thorne, who had threatened ruin, and a cloaked stranger seen arguing with her father the day before. Rain drummed steadily against the window, matching the rhythm of her words, while Big Ben's deep chimes rolled again through the fog. Holmes agreed to investigate at once. We took a hansom cab, its wheels clattering over slick cobbles, wet leather seats cool and smooth beneath us. The fog swirled thick, carrying the sharp tang of coal smoke from 1,000 chimneys. At the Mayfair residence, a tall townhouse with iron railings cold to the touch, Inspector Lestrade awaited us, boots leaving muddy prints on the marble hall floor. The air inside held the faint, metallic bite of gunpowder mixed with old books and carbolic from recent cleaning. "Holmes?" Lestrade greeted with a wry nod, damp newspaper crinkling in his hand. "Plain suicide. Debts, pistol his own, door locked inside." Holmes ignored him, stepping into the study where gas lamps hissed softly and the hearth fire popped. The body had been removed, but a dark stain remained on the carpet, sticky underfoot. He knelt beside the fallen pistol, its barrel cool and smooth. "The first link, Watson," he said quietly. "Observe, no powder burns on the temple, yet residue marks the cuff. The absence of burns at contact range proves the shot came from farther away. The link. Self-inflicted wounds leave scorched skin. This wound lacks them, meaning another hand fired. The forge. I recall the Norwood builder case. Jonas Oldacre staged a supposed suicide with a distant shot, planting the weapon afterward, but the missing burns betrayed him, much as earth clings to boots after a muddy flight, forging a chain that bound the deceiver. The chain. Therefore, this is murder, not despair. The link forges strong, Watson. Did you see it form? The bind. I confess, looking back I should have noticed it myself, but Holmes's mind moved with such speed. The Thames mud scent drifted through an open window, damp and earthy. He examined the telegram on the desk next, paper crinkled and fog damp. Ink smudge here, printer's oil, fresh, yet Hargrove's hands were clean. The oily mark points to a forger in the trade. The link, a lure, perhaps, not a genuine summons. The forge. As in the stockbroker's clerk, where forged ink betrayed the Beddington brothers' press and unraveled their scheme. What chain would you build from this, dear reader? Lestrade scoffed, footsteps heavy on the boards. The door was locked from inside, Holmes. Holmes smiled faintly, magnifying glass in hand, its handle smooth. Scratches on the keyhole, fresh pick marks. Forced entry, subtle but real. The link. Locked rooms hide intruders. The forge. Like the speckled band where bell pull scratches revealed the deadly mechanism. Holmes saw 3 links. How many did you spot? We spoke briefly with valet Jenkins, his voice quavering, leather apron stiff as he fidgeted, gunpowder still sharp in memory. Evening returned us to 221B by hansom, wheels splashing puddles, sweet brandy from Holmes's flask warming my throat. By the fire, pipe smoke curling like fog. He reflected softly. The first link forged. The chain begins. Chapter 2. Forging Connections. As I continue these notes in my journal, the events of that foggy December morning in 1895 began to link together with the quiet inevitability that always marked Sherlock Holmes's investigations. At 221 B. Baker Street, the coal fire burned steadily, its warmth a welcome contrast to the bitter chill outside, while the sharp smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with lingering tobacco from Holmes's pipe. Mrs. Hudson had just cleared breakfast when Holmes rose abruptly, his dressing gown swirling as he paced before the hearth. "We cannot sit idle, Watson," he said, eyes gleaming with that peculiar light. "The first links are forged. Now we must visit the places and people connected to Hargrove. Links multiply when examined closely." He reached for his coat, the rough tweed cool against his fingers, and I followed, still puzzling over the powder burns and ink smudges he had pointed out the night before. Our first destination was Hargrove's warehouse, near the East End docks, reached by a hansom cab whose wheels clattered loudly over wet cobblestones. The fog lay thick, carrying the heavy odor of Thames mud and rotting timber, while distant foghorns moaned like lost souls. Inside the warehouse the air changed, sharp with cinnamon, cloves, and pepper, the spices stinging the nostrils. Rough wooden crates towered around us, their surfaces splintered and textured under my gloved hand. Workers moved crates with grunts and thuds, their boots scraping the plank floor. Mr. Victor Langford, the business partner, met us in a small office cluttered with ledgers. He was a broad-shouldered man with a booming voice and calloused hands that felt like worn leather when we shook. "Gentlemen," he said, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold draft, "Hargrove's death has shaken us all. Debts were mounting. Thorne pressed him hard. But suicide? Never. He was a fighter." Holmes examined the open ledger on the desk, its pages crinkling softly under his touch. "This entry here, the ink has faded unnaturally fast." Langford shifted uncomfortably, his heavy boots scraping grit. "We argue sometimes, yes," he admitted. "But I was here all yesterday afternoon. Ask the men." The bitter taste of warehouse tea lingered on my tongue as Holmes noted muddy boot prints near the door, dock clay mixed with coal dust. The link was there. Did you forge it before Holmes? We next took another hansom to Silas Thorne's offices in the city, rain now pattering steadily on the roof. The building stood solid amid gaslit streets, coal smoke thick in the air outside. Inside, polished oak floors felt smooth underfoot, and a fire crackled warmly in the grate. Thorne, sharp-featured and impeccably dressed, greeted us with cool politeness, adjusting the smooth silk of his cravat. "Hargrove owed me a fortune," he said, voice clipped. "I threatened legal action, yes, but I was at my club from noon till evening. Witnesses aplenty." Holmes's gaze fell on a telegram envelope on the desk, same oily printer's smudge as Hargrove's. "Interesting," Holmes murmured. "This connects to the lure sent to your rival." Thorne's smile tightened, but he offered no denial. The room carried a faint whiff of gunpowder from mounted hunting trophies on the wall. "Watson missed it, did you?" The cold champagne Thorne poured tasted sharp and bitter as we pressed him further on his alibi. Returning to the Hargrove residence in Mayfair, the fog had thickened, dampening our coats and chilling us to the bone. The drawing-room was warm, fire popping, the faint scent of carbolic soap hanging from recent cleaning. Lady Hargrove received us in elegant silk, her hands smooth as she clasped them. "Reginald was distressed by business reverses," she said softly, "but never suicidal. That valet Jenkins has been behaving strangely, nervous, secretive." Holmes led us back to the study. The bloodstain had been scrubbed, but a faint metallic smell remained. He knelt by the window, fingers tracing faint splinters on the sash. "Forced recently. Wool fibers caught here, rough and dark. Lady Hargrove drew in a sharp breath, rain drumming harder outside like urgent footsteps on stairs. "And the safe?" Holmes asked. She nodded. "Some papers missing. Perhaps the will. What connection seems invisible? Can you see it?" Our final call that afternoon took us to a narrow Whitechapel public house, the hansom splashing through puddles in ever narrower streets. The interior reeked of stale ale, pipe tobacco, and damp wool. The bar was sticky under my palm, the hearth fire crackling low. The barkeep, grizzled and red-faced, recalled the cloaked stranger. "Came in yesterday, paid with a sovereign. Odd for such a fellow. Asked after Hargrove, then left quick." Holmes picked up a discarded envelope from the sawdust floor, damp, muddied, same printer's ink smudge. "Another thread to the forger," he said quietly. Footsteps shuffled behind us as patrons murmured, the foghorn sounding closer now, mournful in the gathering dusk. By evening, we returned to 221B, the gasogene fizzing as Holmes prepared soda water, its cool bubbles a small comfort. We sat by the fire, the crackle and warmth wrapping around us, while rain tapped insistently at the window. Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe, smoke curling upward like the forming chain itself. "Connections are forging, Watson," he said. "Langford's mud, Thorne's telegram, the fibers at the window, Jenkins's unease, the stranger's sovereign. The quarry begins to feel the tightening." I nodded, still turning the day's observations in my mind, the smells of spice and ink, the textures of crates and silk, the sounds of wheels and rain. Before Holmes explains further, what does this growing evidence chain tell you, dear reader? Links forging. The chain takes shape. Chapter 3. The chain grows. In setting down these further events from my journal, I marvel at how swiftly the fog of uncertainty began to thin under Holmes's relentless scrutiny that December week of 1895. The morning after our rounds of interviews dawned cold and gray at 221B Baker Street. The coal fire burned bright in the grate, though its warmth battling the bitter chill that pressed against the window panes, while the faint smell of Mrs. Hudson's fresh-baked bread drifted up the 17 stairs, mingling with the ever-present tobacco scent from Holmes's Persian slipper. Holmes was already dressed and alert, standing by the window with his violin bow in hand, though he merely tapped it absently against his palm rather than play. "We return to the scene, Watson," he declared. "The study holds more than we first perceived. Clues overlooked by haste are often the strongest links." I nodded, still turning over the previous day's observations, the muddy boots, the printer's ink, the wool fibers, while the distant foghorns from the Thames sounded their low, mournful notes through the mist. We took a hansom cab to the Hargrove residence in Mayfair, wheels rumbling over damp cobblestones slick with overnight rain. The fog clung thick to our coats, carrying the acrid tang of coal smoke from nearby chimneys. Inspector Lestrade awaited us at the door, his boots leaving wet prints on the marble hall floor, a crumpled newspaper in his gloved hand. "Back again, Holmes?" he said with a wry smile. "I've had the room cleaned, but nothing new has turned up." Inside the study, the gas lamps hissed softly, their yellow light flickering across walls lined with leather-bound volumes. The hearth fire we rekindled crackled and popped, sending small sparks upward, while the air still held faint traces of gunpowder. and the sharp, carbolic smell of recent scrubbing. The dark stain on the carpet had been mostly removed, but its texture remained slightly raised under my boot. Holmes dropped to his hands and knees at once, magnifying glass in hand, the cold floorboards creaking beneath him. "Here," he said sharply, pointing to a partial footprint in the fine dust near the window. "Overlooked in the first rush. Clay mixed with coal dust, characteristic of the East End docks." Lestrade grunted, stepping closer, his heavy tread echoing. Holmes traced the tread pattern with a gloved finger. "And these fibers caught on the window sash. Rough wool, dark, recently torn." A cold draft slipped through the slightly raised sash, bringing the damp, earthy scent of garden mud from below. I held the lamp steady, its warm glow steady against the chill. Holmes rose and moved to the safe, behind a false panel in the bookcase. With careful pressure he opened it, unlocked now, and withdrew a half-burned letter, its edges charred and brittle like dry leaves. The acrid smell of scorched paper and ink rose sharply. "Threatening words," Holmes read aloud. "Pay what is owed or face ruin. V.L. Victor Langford's initials, no doubt." Lady Hargrove entered at that moment, summoned by the maid. Her silk dress rustled softly, hands clasped tightly. "That is Mr. Langford's mark," she whispered, eyes wide. "But he was Reginald's partner, surely not." Holmes turned to her. "The chain grows, madam. Observe." He held up the charred letter. "The footprints unique mud, dock, clay, and coal. The link. Only the area around Hargrove's own warehouse produces such a precise combination. The forge. I recall the Boscombe Valley mystery, where a single boot print in rare Australian clay connected the killer to his colonial past. Young McCarthy stood accused, yet the elder's boots bore identical soil from a secret meeting years before, forging link after link until the chain-bound Black Jack of Ballarat, whose grudge and footsteps betrayed him across oceans. The chain. So here the intruder came from the docks, Langford, or one in his employ. The chain grows stronger, Watson. Did you forge this link before I spoke? The bind. I confess the connection had eluded me until that moment, though looking back the signs were plain. Big Ben tolled noon outside, its deep vibrations rolling through the fog-laden air like a warning. Holmes continued his examination, now lifting a small brass button from the carpet near the window, cold to the touch, engraved with a faint crest. "From a man's overcoat," he murmured. "Not Hargrove's style." We stepped into the small garden behind the house. Rain had softened the earth. Handsome tire tracks remained fresh in the mud, squelching under our boots. Recent arrival and departure, Holmes noted. Post-rain, pre-discovery. The damp soil carried the heavy smell of wet leaves and Thames mud wafting on the breeze. Back inside, by the rekindled fire, Holmes paced slowly, violin now tucked under his chin though he played no note. He reflected aloud on an earlier case, much like a study in scarlet, where scattered clues, cab tracks, pills, a woman's wedding ring, forged an unbreakable chain around Jefferson Hope's revenge. Observation defeats artifice, Watson. Every detail speaks if we but listen. Another small discovery came as Holmes re-examined the telegram envelope. A tiny flake of printer's ink lodged in the flap, matching the smudges we had seen elsewhere. "The forger grows careless," he said. Rain drummed harder against the window now, footsteps of servants echoing in the hall beyond. What chain would you build from these new observations, dear reader? The connection seems invisible at first. Can you see it forming? As the afternoon waned, the study grew colder despite the fire. Holmes stood before the hearth, steepled fingers under his chin, pipe smoke curling upward in slow spirals. The day's links had multiplied and begun to interlock with quiet certainty. The chain grows stronger. Logic binds. Chapter 4. Testing the links. As I record these next stages of the inquiry in my journal, the pace of our work quickened that December afternoon in 1895, with Sherlock Holmes determined to test every emerging link before the chain could be declared sound. At 221 B. Baker Street, the coal fire burned steadily, its warmth a steady comfort against the bitter fog outside, while the faint crackle of flames mingled with the soft hiss of the gasogene as Holmes prepared a fresh soda water. He stood before the hearth, pipe in hand, drawing thoughtfully on the strong tobacco whose rich scent filled the room. "Speculation is idle, Watson," he said. "We must now put each observation to the trial. Weak links will shatter under pressure. The true ones will hold." His eyes gleamed with that peculiar light of anticipation. I nodded, still turning over the dock mud, the wool fibers, the printer's ink, and the half-burned letter we had found earlier. The game, as he so rarely said, it was truly afoot. Our first test took us back to Victor Langford at the East End warehouse. The hansom cab rattled over uneven cobbles, rain pattering on the roof, the sharp smell of Thames mud and wet timber heavy in the air. Inside the warehouse, the spice odors overwhelmed, cinnamon and pepper stinging the nostrils, while rough crates towered around us, their splintered surfaces catching on my coat. Langford met us in his cluttered office, a sweat beading on his brow despite the cold draft whistling through the cracks. Holmes wasted no time. The footprint in Hargrove's study, dock clay and coal dust, matches boots we see here, he said, pointing to Langford's own mud-caked footwear. "And the half-burned letter bears your initials." Langford's broad face paled, his calloused hands clenching. I argued with him, yes, debts were crushing, but I never entered that study. I was here all afternoon. The men will swear to it. Holmes pressed harder, describing the window fibers. Langford's alibi held under questioning from the warehouseman, but his boots bore fresh mud of the exact composition. The link bent, but did not break, yet his nervous glance toward the ledgers suggested more to uncover. A weak link in his denial had cracked. We next hastened to Silas Thorne's club in Pall Mall, the cab splashing through puddles under gas-lit lamps. Inside the club, the air was warm and thick with cigar smoke and the scent of polished leather. Deep armchairs felt smooth under us as we sat. A fire crackled in the marble hearth. Thorne received us with cool composure, silk cravat immaculate, though his fingers drummed uneasily on the armrest. "The brass button found near the window," Holmes said, producing it from his pocket, cold and gleaming in the lamplight. "And wool fibers matching your dark overcoat, as seen by witnesses near Mayfair that afternoon." Thorne laughed shortly. "Buttons are common, Holmes. I visited Hargrove's house 2 days earlier. Business, nothing more. My club members dined with me yesterday. Ask them." Several gentlemen confirmed his presence from noon onward. The alibi appeared solid, yet the fibers and the oily telegram smudge on his desk connected him to the forged lure. A red herring link, His visit was real, but the timing did not fit the murder hour. It bent and snapped under scrutiny. Our third test came at the Hargrove residence, where we summoned Valet Jenkins to the servants' hall. The small room smelled of leather polish and faint tobacco. His stiff apron rustled as he fidgeted on a wooden chair, footsteps of other servants echoing softly in the corridor beyond. Holmes held up the telegram envelope. "Printer's ink on your fingers, Jenkins. Fresh smudges. You forged the message that lured Hargrove to his study." The man's face drained of color. "Mr. Langford paid me a sovereign to send it, said it was only to arrange a private meeting. I swear I heard the shot and broke in at once. I never touched the safe or the pistol." His trembling hands felt clammy when I steadied him. The link held. He was complicit in the deception, but not the killing. A partial break. His role was accessory, not principal. A Lady Hargrove we questioned next in the warm drawing-room. Rain drumming steadily outside. The fire popped, carbolic scent faint from cleaning. Her silk dress rustled as she sat, hands smooth on a lace handkerchief. Holmes revealed changes to the will that favored her position. "Motive exists," he said gently. She shook her head, tears welling. "I loved Reginald. I was with my maid all afternoon, sewing in this very room." The maid corroborated, the timeline unbreakable. Another link tested and held firm, no guilt there. Miss Eliza Hargrove, we met briefly at a nearby tea-house, fog horns sounding distant through the mist. Hot tea steamed bitter in our cups, sweet brandy warming my throat. She spoke of her father's fears of Thorn. Holmes probed her account of the morning. Small inconsistencies appeared in the hour of the telegram's arrival. The link wobbled. A daughter's natural distress had muddled memory, but nothing criminal emerged. It bent, did not break. Finally, we traced the cloaked stranger to a dingy Whitechapel lodging-house, mud squelching underfoot, fog damp on our faces. The man, Croft, a hired rough, confessed in a low room reeking of stale ale and coal smoke. Thorn paid me to deliver a note and watch the house. I never went inside, never fired a shot. His rough wool coat matched no fibers. His sovereign payment traced to Thorn. The mysterious visitor link shattered entirely, a red herring meant to confuse. Back at 221B by evening. At the fire crackled warmly, violin strings twanging absently as Holmes paced. Pipe smoke curled upward, tobacco sharp in the air. "Weak links have shattered, Watson," he said. "Langford's mud and forgery payment hold. Thorn's fibers and payment to Croft connect. Jenkins' role is accessory. The suicide theory is dust. The true chain now emerges clear and strong." Before Holmes explains the final shape, what do these tested links tell you, dear reader? The connection grows visible, the weak links shattered. The true chain emerges. Chapter 5. The chain tightens. As I commit these tense hours to my journal, I recall how the chain we had been forging across that foggy December of 1895 suddenly drew taut, pulling the guilty inexorably toward exposure. At 221 B. Baker Street, the coal fire roared against the bitter cold outside, its warmth spreading through the room, while the sharp scent of Holmes's strong tobacco curled from his pipe. He stood before the hearth, or steepled fingers under his chin, eyes alight with the certainty that precedes a decisive move. "The time for testing is past, Watson," he said quietly. "The links now point clearly to Silas Thorn and Victor Langford acting in concert. We must confront them before they scatter." I felt the familiar quickening of pulse. The quiet domesticity of Baker Street was about to give way to action. Holmes donned his ulster, the rough tweed cool and damp from the morning mist, and we descended the 17 steps to hail a hansom. Intelligence from a discreet inquiry at Thorne's club placed him hurrying toward the docks that very afternoon, likely to arrange passage or destroy papers. The cab rattled through gaslit streets, wheels clattering over slick cobblestones, rain slashing sideways in the wind. Foghorns moaned from the river, low and urgent, as coal smoke thickened the air around us. We reached the East End docks just as dusk deepened, the Thames lapping coldly against stone quays, the heavy smell of mud, tar, and wet ropes enveloping everything. Holmes spotted Thorne first, dark overcoat, hurrying along a narrow wharf between towering warehouses. "There," he whispered. Thorne glanced back, saw us, and broke into a run, boots pounding on wet planks. "Stop, in the name of the law!" I shouted, but he darted between crates, his figure vanishing into shadow. We gave chase, my breath coming in the sharp bursts, the rough wood of packing cases scraping my palms as I rounded corners. Spice scents from open warehouse doors mingled with gunpowder from moored ships, the air thick and choking. Holmes moved with surprising speed, cutting through an alley of stacked barrels. We emerged near the water's edge where Thorne stood cornered against a low railing, the black river churning below. Fog swirled around the gas lamps, their hiss barely audible over the lap of waves and distant shouts of stevedores. Thorne's hand dipped into his coat. A pistol glinted coldly in the lamplight. "Enough running, Mr. Thorne," Holmes called, voice calm amid the chaos. "The chain binds you now." Thorne's face twisted in fury. "You know nothing." He raised the weapon. The sharp crack of a shot split the air, the smell of fresh gunpowder sharp and acrid. I lunged forward instinctively, shoulder striking his arm. The bullet flew wide, splintering wood behind us. Thorne staggered. I grappled with him, his rough wool coat tearing under my grip as we wrestled near the edge. Holmes stepped in swiftly, wrenching the pistol free with a practiced twist. Footsteps thundered. Inspector Lestrade and 2 constables arrived, summoned by a messenger Holmes had dispatched earlier. Handcuffs clicked cold around Thorne's wrists. He sagged, breathing hard, rain dripping from his hat brim. In the dim light of a nearby warehouse lantern, Holmes searched Thorne's pockets. His fingers closed around a folded document, the missing will from Hargrove's safe, its paper crinkled and damp. "Forged," Holmes said, holding it to the light. The signature wavers. Ink smudges match those on the telegrams. This document disinherits Miss Eliza and enriches you and Langford jointly. Thorne spat rain from his lips, but said nothing. The crucial link had fallen into place. We conveyed Thorne to a small office on the docks, its wooden walls damp, a single oil lamp flickering. Lestrade stood by, notebook open. Holmes laid out the evidence methodically. The mud upon your boots, fresh dock clay with coal dust. The link. It matches the partial print beneath Hargrove's study window, placed after the rain began but before discovery. The forge. I recall the Musgrave ritual, where boot impressions in soft lawn revealed a hidden passage and a murderer's greed. Reginald Musgrave's own steps betrayed the secret vault, though forging links from print to motive that bound Brunton's fate and exposed the ancient treason beneath the elm. So here, your footprints chain you to the garden entry and the murder itself. The chain. The window was forced. You entered to stage the scene after Langford fired from within. Before I continue, what does this tightening chain tell you, dear reader? The bind. Thorne finally broke. It was Langford who pulled the trigger, he rasped. He tampered with the lock from inside after I left by the window. Hargrove had discovered our embezzlement from the India trade years ago, threatened exposure. The forged telegram lured him to the study. The pistol was his own. We only meant to frighten him into silence. His voice cracked. But Langford panicked. Holmes nodded once. Motive, means, opportunity, all accounted for. The chain no longer bends. Lestrade took Thorne away in irons, the clank of metal echoing along the quay. Rain drummed on the tin roof above us, steady and relentless. Back at 221B that night, the fire burned low but warm, the bitter taste of brandy lingering on my tongue, as Holmes sat in his armchair, pipe smoke drifting upward. The day's chase had left us both weary, yet a quiet triumph settled over the room. The hansom wheels still seemed to echo in my ears. The cold river wind still bit at my face. The chain tightens, Holmes said softly, almost to himself. No escape remains. Chapter 6. Links to the Past. In chronicling this case, I find that the deepest revelations often lie not in the present moment, but in the shadows of the past, where old sins cast long chains forward into the present. That December evening in 1895, after Thorne's capture at the docks, the fog seemed to press even thicker against the windows of 221B Baker Street. The coal fire burned low but steady, its warmth a quiet comfort against the bitter chill outside, while the faint crackle of embers mingled with the soft hiss of gas lamps. Holmes sat in his armchair, pipe in hand, drawing thoughtfully on the strong tobacco whose rich, acrid scent filled the room and curled upward like the forming links of our chain. "We have the men in custody, Watson," he said quietly. "But the full chain requires understanding the motive's origin. Crimes of this nature rarely spring from sudden impulse. They are forged in years past." He reached for a small packet of documents Lestrade had forwarded earlier that day, old trade ledgers, colonial correspondence, and a faded photograph. The paper felt brittle and textured under my fingers, carrying the musty smell of long-stored archives. We began with Thorne's history. A telegram to Scotland Yard had already yielded records from the India office. Silas Thorne had served as a junior agent in Calcutta during the 1870s, handling spice shipments for British firms, including the young Reginald Hargrove's fledgling enterprise. The photograph showed them together on a veranda, sun-bleached and serious, standing beside crates stamped with company marks. "Partners once," Holmes murmured, until embezzlement soured the alliance. Further digging in the papers revealed the fracture. A confidential report from 1878 noted discrepancies in cargo manifests, shipments of cardamom and saffron short-weighted, profits diverted. Thorne was implicated, but never prosecuted. Hargrove, discovering the fraud, had quietly severed ties and returned to England to build his own legitimate trade. Hargrove held evidence, Holmes said, tapping a yellowed letter. Threatened exposure if Thorne did not repay. But Thorne vanished to the continent, resurfacing years later in London as a rival merchant, with capital that could only have come from elsewhere. Victor Langford's past connected next. Born in Whitechapel, he had risen through Hargrove's firm as a clerk, loyal and ambitious. Yet a discreet inquiry through police contacts uncovered a shared secret. Langford had been Thorne's contact in the docks during the India fraud, falsifying ledgers for a cut. When Hargrove uncovered the scheme anew, perhaps after receiving an anonymous tip, he confronted both men. The forged telegram was their desperate bid to silence him before he went to the authorities. Holmes concluded. The pistol shot followed panic. We visited Scotland Yard briefly that evening to confirm details, the hansom cab rattling through gaslit streets, rain pattering on the roof. Inside the yard, the air smelled of damp wool, ink, and old paper. Wooden desks felt smooth under hands resting on files. Lestrade handed us more correspondence, letters from Calcutta agents confirming Thorne's sudden wealth after Hargrove's departure. Motive clear as day now, Lestrade admitted grudgingly. Greed from the past, fear in the present. Back at 221B, Holmes spread the documents before the fire. The flames popped softly, casting flickering shadows across faded signatures and ink blots. He traced the chain aloud. Thorne's embezzlement in India, first link. Hargrove's discovery and quiet threat, second. Their reunion in London, renewed pressure, third. Langford's complicity, the forged lure, forced entry, distant shot, final links. The bitter taste of strong coffee lingered on my tongue as I listened, the warmth of the hearth contrasting the cold certainty of the evidence. Holmes paused, drawing deeply on his pipe. This case recalls the Hound of the Baskervilles in its reliance on past shadows, he reflected. There, a centuries-old legend of a spectral hound was exploited by Stapleton to murder his cousin and claim an inheritance. The chain began with ancestral documents and a portrait resemblance, forged through fake footprints in phosphorus mud, a trained dog, and a hidden motive of greed. Each link, legend, geology, biology, psychology, interlocked until the past's deception was exposed in the present, binding the criminal in his own trap. So here, colonial fraud, hidden letters, forged telegrams, and footprints in dock mud, all threads from years ago tightening around Thorne and Langford today. I nodded, the room quiet, save for the steady tick of the mantel clock and distant foghorns from the Thames. They believed the past buried, I said, but evidence endures. Precisely, Holmes replied. The criminal forgets that every action leaves a trace. Ink on fingers, mud on boots, a resentment in memory. Observation revives what deception seeks to entomb. We sat in silence for a time, the fire crackling, rain tapping insistently at the panes. Mrs. Hudson brought a tray of hot tea. Its steam carried the comforting, bitter aroma that steadied my thoughts. The day's revelations had woven the final strands. Motive, rooted in colonial betrayal. Means, through old accomplices. Opportunity seized in panic. All links now connected, past and present, forming one unbroken sequence. Looking back, I should have seen earlier how the printer's ink and dock mud pointed not merely to forgery and entry, but to a decades-old grudge. Holmes's method never faltered. Each observation forged another connection until the chain was complete. What hidden past would you uncover from these traces, dear reader? The connection spans years. Can you see how it binds the present? Past and present, one unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The Complete Chain. As I set these climactic moments to paper in my journal, the fog that had shrouded London for so many days in that December of 1895 seemed at last to lift, both outside our windows and within the mystery itself. At 221 B. Baker Street, the coal fire burned bright and steady, its warmth filling the familiar room, while the crackle of flames and the faint hiss of gas lamps provided a calm backdrop to what would prove the decisive hour. Holmes had summoned the principal figures to our sitting room. Silas Thorne and Victor Langford in custody irons, Valet Jenkins under police escort, Lady Hargrove and her stepdaughter Eliza seated nervously on the settee, and Inspector Lestrade standing near the door with notebook in hand. The air carried the mingled scents of damp wool from outdoor coats, strong tobacco from Holmes's pipe, and the bitter steam rising from fresh pots of tea Mrs. Hudson had thoughtfully provided. Holmes stood before the hearth, tall and composed, his ulster discarded and sleeves rolled back. He drew once on his pipe, the rich smoke curling upward, then set it aside. "Gentlemen and ladies," he began, voice clear and measured, "the chain is now forged complete. Link by link I shall lay it before you, so that no shadow of doubt remains." He turned first to the physical evidence. The pistol lacked powder burns on the temple. Shot fired from a distance of at least 3 feet. Impossible for suicide. Link 1. The window sash bore fresh splinters and dark wool fibers matching Mr. Thorne's overcoat. Dock mud, clay mixed with coal dust, clung to his boots and to a partial footprint beneath that same window. Link 2. A brass button from Langford's warehouse coat lay near the sill. Printer's ink smudged the forged telegram envelopes in Jenkins's fingers. Link 3. The half-burned threatening letter in the safe carried Langford's initials. These traces placed Thorne outside, Langford inside, and the weapon in neither Hargrove's nor the victim's immediate control. Next, the timeline. At noon, the false telegram, forged by Jenkins at Langford's instruction, arrived, luring Hargrove to lock himself in the study. Link 4. Thorne, cloaked and hired through an intermediary, arrived by hansom shortly after 2, forced the window quietly, and passed inside. Link 5. At 3 o'clock the shot rang out, fired by Langford from within, after he had slipped in earlier through the servants' entrance, using his old keys. Thorne exited by the window. Langford tampered with the lock from inside to simulate a sealed room, then departed unseen. Jenkins, hearing the report, delayed breaking the door long enough for the scene to appear undisturbed. Link 6. He addressed the witnesses. Lady Hargrove and Miss Eliza saw only shadows and heard nothing until the shot. Jenkins confessed his minor role, paid to forge and deliver the message, but ignorant of murder. The club alibis of both men collapse under the physical traces. Thorne's fibers and mud post-date his claimed presence elsewhere. Langford's warehouse men recall his brief absence that afternoon. Link 7. Finally, motive. Years ago in Calcutta, Thorne embezzled from Hargrove's shipments, cardamom and saffron shorted, profits diverted. Hargrove discovered it, held evidence, and threatened exposure upon their reunion in London. Langford, complicit from the start as dock clerk, shared the guilt and the fear. When Hargrove renewed his demand for restitution or threatened Scotland Yard, they acted to silence him forever. The forged will, found in Thorne's pocket, disinherited Miss Eliza and enriched both conspirators. Greed and dread from the past forged their present crime. Link 8. Holmes stepped closer to the prisoners. The final connecting link, panic. Langford fired when Hargrove reached for his own pistol in self-defense. Thorne staged the suicide scene afterward. Every detail interlocks. No weak link survives scrutiny. Thorne lunged forward suddenly, chains rattling, face contorted. "Curse you, Holmes! We only meant to frighten him." Langford remained silent, head bowed, the fight gone from him. Lestrade moved swiftly, constables closing in to secure them more firmly. Lady Hargrove wept quietly into her handkerchief. Eliza reached for her hand, relief dawning on her pale face. Jenkins hung his head in shame, but spoke no denial. Holmes turned to me, a faint smile touching his lips. "You know my methods, Watson. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." He paused, letting the room absorb the weight of his words. The mud's unique composition, dock clay and coal dust alone. The link. It places Thorne at the window after rain began. Knew the forge. As in the Valley of Fear, where traces of coal dust and a secret society's cipher chained Bertie Edwards to his American past and bound the Scourers in retribution. Each small mark forging the larger chain of vengeance and justice. So here the physical, temporal, testimonial, and motivational links unite without break. The chain. The complete chain binds you both. Holmes saw every connection. How many did you spot before the end, dear reader? The bind. Lestrade cleared his throat. Enough for the Old Bailey, I should think. The prisoners were led away, the clank of irons echoing down the 17 stairs. The room fell quiet, save for the steady tick of the mantel clock and the soft pop of the fire. Every link accounted for. The chain complete. Chapter 8. Justice in Chains. In these final pages of my journal, I record the swift and inexorable descent of justice upon those who had sought to bind another in deception, it only to find themselves ensnared by the very chain they ignored. The morning after the gathering, at 221 B Baker Street, dawned crisp and unusually clear for that December of 1895. The perpetual fog had retreated, leaving the London streets sharp under pale sunlight that glinted off wet cobblestones and the brass fittings of passing hansom cabs. At Scotland Yard, the air inside the cells carried the familiar mingled smells of damp stone, carbolic soap, and the faint metallic tang of iron bars. Silas Thorne and Victor Langford sat in separate holding rooms, wrists bound by cold handcuffs that clinked softly whenever they shifted. Inspector Lestrade had arranged the formal arrest proceedings with characteristic efficiency. We arrived by cab just after 9, wheels rumbling over the yard's uneven stones, the distant chime of Big Ben rolling across the river like a solemn bell. Holmes stepped down first, ulster collar turned up against the chill, a pipe already drawing as we entered the building. The corridors echoed with the heavy tread of constables and the low murmur of voices. A coal stove in the corner hissed warmth into the otherwise cold space. Thorne was brought first into the charge room, a narrow chamber lit by gas lamps, whose hiss provided steady undertone. His dark overcoat had been removed. He stood in shirt sleeves, face pale and unshaven, eyes burning with a mixture of defiance and despair. Lestrade read the charges in a flat, official voice. Murder of Reginald Hargrove, conspiracy to forge documents, attempted flight from justice. Each count landed like a hammer blow. Thorne's jaw tightened. He glanced once at Holmes, who stood silent near the wall, arms folded, watching with calm detachment. "You think you've won, Holmes," Thorne rasped, voice rough from a night in the cells. "But Hargrove would have ruined us both. He held that old India ledger over our heads like a noose. We only wanted him quiet. His words hung in the air, bitter as the taste of stale coffee Lestrade had offered earlier. Holmes made no reply. He merely inclined his head slightly, letting the man's own confession tighten the final coils. Langford followed moments later, escorted by 2 constables whose boots scraped the stone floor. He appeared more broken than defiant, shoulders slumped, eyes downcast, the rough tweed of his coat hanging loose. When the charges were read, he offered no protest, only a quiet admission. "It was my hand on the trigger," he said almost inaudibly. "Panic. He reached for his own pistol. I thought he meant to shoot. I never intended murder." The room fell silent save for the scratch of Lestrade's pen on official paper and the distant clatter of a hansom passing outside. Jenkins was processed separately in an adjoining room, his role reduced to accessory after full confession. He wept openly as the lesser charges were explained: forgery of the telegram, delay in raising alarm, his stiff leather apron replaced by plain prison garb. Lady Hargrove and Miss Eliza had been spared the ordeal. They waited in a side office, where the warmth of a small fire and the comforting smell of fresh tea steadied their nerves. Eliza clutched the recovered genuine will, now restored to her, its paper smooth and uncharred under her fingers. Loose ends were tied with Holmes's usual precision. The suicide staging, pistol placed in Hargrove's hand post-mortem, a Dr. lock tampered from within, was explained by the absence of powder burns and the window fibers. The mysterious cloaked visitor, Croft, had been paid only to deliver a decoy note and watch the house. His testimony, extracted under caution, confirmed Thorne's orchestration without direct involvement in the killing. The forged will, its ink smudges matching the telegram envelopes, sealed the conspiracy. Lestrade closed his notebook with a satisfied snap. "Every thread accounted for, Holmes. The Crown will have no difficulty." Scotland Yard's role proved decisive in these final hours. Lestrade's men had secured the docks before Thorne could flee, intercepted telegrams sent in haste, and preserved the physical evidence: mud-caked boots, charred letter, brass button, with meticulous care. Even the rival merchant Thorne had feared turned out innocent. His threats had been mere bluster over legitimate debts. The Yard's thoroughness left no room for appeal. As we left the building, the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the yard. Holmes paused on the steps, drawing deeply on his pipe, the smoke rising in slow spirals against the clear sky. "Elementary," he said once, the word soft and almost reflective. The criminal binds himself when he forgets that every action leaves its trace. We returned to 221B by hansom, wheels clattering over now dry cobbles, the city resuming its ordinary rhythm around us. Street vendors calling, a newsboys shouting headlines, Big Ben tolling the hour. Inside our rooms, the fire crackled welcomingly. Mrs. Hudson had left a tray of hot scones whose sweet aroma mingled with lingering tobacco. Holmes settled into his armchair, violin resting across his knees, fingers absently plucking a slow, thoughtful melody. The prisoners were bound, legally, irrevocably. Thorne and Langford faced the gallows or transportation, Jenkins probation and disgrace. The innocent walked free, their futures unclouded. London's fog would return, but for this moment the air felt clean. The criminal bound, justice served. Chapter 9. Links restored. In the quiet aftermath recorded here in my journal, The machinery of justice moved with the deliberate certainty that London's courts reserve for cases where evidence has been forged into an unbreakable chain. That December of 1895 drew toward its close under skies that remained unusually clear after so many days of fog. The pale winter sun glinted off the frost-rimed cobblestones outside the Old Bailey, where the trial of Silas Thorne and Victor Langford commenced with somber efficiency. Inside the great courtroom the air carried the familiar sense of polished oak, old paper, and the faint carbolic tang from scrubbed floors. Gas lamps hissed overhead, their light steady on the high benches and the jury box, while the low murmur of spectators and the scratch of reporters' pens provided constant undertone. Thorne and Langford stood in the dock, wrists no longer in irons but their faces marked by the weight of confinement. Thorne's sharp features had grown gaunt. Langford's broad shoulders seemed diminished. Both pleaded not guilty, yet the prosecution, led by a barrister whose voice rang clear and unhurried, presented the chain Holmes had laid out so meticulously. The absence of powder burns on Hargrove's temple proved distant firing. A dock mud on Thorne's boots and wool fibers at the window placed him at the scene. Printer's ink linked Jenkins's forgery to Langford's payment. The recovered will, its signature wavering under expert scrutiny, sealed the motive of greed rooted in colonial fraud. Witness after witness, Lady Hargrove, Miss Eliza, even the humbled valet Jenkins, confirmed timelines and details. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours before returning verdicts of guilty on all counts: murder, conspiracy, forgery. A sentence followed swiftly. Thorne received penal servitude for life. Langford, who had fired the fatal shot, was condemned to hang, though later commuted to transportation after appeal on grounds of diminished responsibility and panic. Jenkins, for his lesser part, drew 2 years' hard labor, a punishment tempered by his full cooperation. The courtroom emptied slowly, footsteps echoing on stone stairs, the heavy doors closing behind the condemned with finality. Outside, in the corridor, Lady Hargrove and Miss Eliza waited. The elder woman's silk dress rustled softly as she embraced her stepdaughter. Eliza's hands, no longer trembling, held the genuine will now officially restored. "Father's legacy is safe," she whispered, voice steady for the first time since that rainy evening at 221B. The document, its paper smooth and uncharred, ensured the spice business passed intact to her management. Lady Hargrove would retire to a quiet house in Kensington, supported by a modest annuity. Both women walked free of suspicion, their futures unclouded by the shadow that had fallen across Mayfair. Holmes declined any reward beyond the satisfaction of the case solved. When a grateful note arrived from Eliza enclosing a generous check, he returned it with a brief reply: "The truth is payment enough." We sat by the fire that evening at Baker Street, the coal crackling warmly, the bitter aroma of strong tea mingling with pipe tobacco. Holmes plucked absently at his violin strings, producing a slow, contemplative air that seemed to echo the resolution of the affair. London began to resume its ordinary rhythm. Hansom cabs clattered along Baker Street once more without urgency. Newsboys shouted headlines unrelated to murder. Big Ben told the hours with its familiar deep resonance. The fog returned in gentle veils rather than suffocating banks, carrying the usual sense of coal smoke and Thames mud without menace. At the Hargrove warehouse, spices were unloaded as before, cinnamon and pepper sharp in the winter air. In Mayfair, The townhouse windows glowed with gaslight, servants moving about their duties without fear. I walked the streets near Baker Street one afternoon, coat collar turned against the chill, and noted how the city's pulse beat steadily onward. A vendor sold hot chestnuts, whose sweet, smoky scent rose invitingly. A crossing sweeper cleared frost from the pavement with brisk strokes. Ladies in fur muffs passed arm in arm, discussing Christmas preparations. The tragedy in Mayfair had faded from daily conversation, replaced by ordinary cares and small joys. Looking back, the restoration of order felt almost miraculous. An innocent household, shattered by suspicion and grief, had been cleared by logic's quiet force. Miss Eliza would carry on her father's trade with vigor. Lady Hargrove found peace in retirement. Even Jenkins, after serving his sentence, might find honest work elsewhere. The guilty were bound by law as firmly as they had once sought to bind another in deception. Holmes reflected on this one evening as we sat before the fire, violin now silent. The chain method restores balance, Watson. Each link, physical trace, timeline, witness, motive, when properly forged, not only binds the criminal, but frees the blameless. Order returns because deception cannot withstand observation. The final link, justice's seal. The link, it connects crime to consequence without fail. The forge, as in the sign of 4, where the Agra treasure's long chain of theft, murder, and betrayal bound the conspirators at last in retribution, freeing Mary Morstan from inherited shadow and restoring rightful inheritance. So here the past's fraud, present deception, and final exposure interlock to clear the innocent and punish the guilty. The chain. The connection, once invisible, now stands plain. Can you see how fully it restores London's quiet order, dear reader? The bind. The city moved forward, its streets bustling once more under gaslight and fog. No shadow lingered over Mayfair or Baker Street. Order restored to London streets. Chapter 10. By the Fire at Baker Street. That December of 1895 drew to its close with a quiet that felt almost restorative after the storm of suspicion and revelation we had weathered. One evening, as snow began to fall, gently outside the windows of 221B Baker Street, soft flakes catching the glow of gas lamps in the street below, Holmes and I sat at ease before the coal fire. The room was warm, the flames crackling steadily in the grate, sending small sparks upward to dance against the dark chimney. The familiar scents of strong tobacco from Holmes's pipe and the bitter steam of fresh coffee Mrs. Hudson had left on the side table wrapped around us like an old friend. His Stradivarius rested on the table, silent for once. My notebook lay open in my lap, the final pages of this strange affair nearly complete. A copy of the Times lay folded beside me, its headlines already proclaiming Mayfair Mystery Solved. Baker Street Consultant Clears Innocent Parties. A telegram from Miss Eliza Hargrove had arrived earlier that day, expressing profound gratitude and announcing that the spice business would continue under her capable direction, with Lady Hargrove comfortably settled in Kensington. The guilty men, Thorne and Langford, awaited their fates in Pentonville. Jenkins had begun his sentence quietly. London moved on, its fog returning in gentle veils, hansoms clattering past without urgency, Big Ben tolling the hours with steady reassurance. Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling. "A satisfactory conclusion, Watson," he said at last. The chain held firm from first link to last. I set my coffee cup down, its warmth lingering on my fingers. You forged it link by link with such precision that even now, looking back, the logic seems inevitable. Yet at the start it was all fog and shadow. He smiled faintly, steepled fingers under his chin. That is the beauty of observation, my dear fellow. The criminal believes his deception complete, yet every action leaves its trace. Mud on a boot, ink on an envelope. The absence of powder burns where they should be. The method is simple. Collect the data, eliminate the impossible, and what remains, however improbable, is truth. Each link is forged in reason. Connect them properly, and no force can break the chain. He leaned forward slightly, eyes gleaming in the firelight. This case reminds me strongly of the final problem, though the stakes here were personal rather than global. There, Professor Moriarty wove a web of crime across continents. Blackmail, murder, extortion, all concealed behind a facade of academic respectability. The chain began with small anomalies, a coded message here, a sudden flight there, a footprint in alpine snow that did not match the official narrative. Link by link it grew. Financial records, witness statements, the professor's own mathematical precision turned against him, until the Reichenbach Falls revealed the final confrontation. Moriarty overlooked the traces he left in his arrogance. The observation defeated him because deception cannot endure relentless scrutiny. Here, too, Thorne and Langford forgot that the past endures in ledgers, in mud, in resentment. Their scheme seemed perfect until the first link, the absent powder burns, was noticed. From there, the chain tightened inexorably. I nodded, the fire's warmth seeping into my bones as snow tapped softly against the panes. You always say data is everything. Yet, so many overlook the smallest details. Precisely, Holmes replied. The science of deduction rests on this. The world speaks constantly, but only the trained mind listens. A flake of printer's ink, a fiber caught on a sash, the unique composition of dock mud. These are not accidents. They are records. The criminal imagines he erases his path, yet the earth remembers every step, the ink every touch, the weapon every discharge. When you train yourself to see these silent witnesses, a deception crumbles. It is not magic, Watson. It is method. Eliminate the impossible, suicide by distant shot, locked room without entry, and the chain forms of its own accord. He paused, reaching for his violin at last. His fingers plucked a slow, reflective air, the notes rising and falling like the rhythm of our many investigations. In the end, the chain does more than bind the guilty. It restores order. Miss Eliza inherits what is hers. Lady Hargrove finds peace. Even Jenkins may yet redeem himself. London continues. Its fog, its gaslight, its ceaseless life, because truth, once forged, holds fast. The melody faded. He set the instrument aside. "Forge your own chains, dear reader," he said, almost as if addressing the invisible audience beyond the firelight. Observe keenly, question relentlessly, connect logically. The smallest detail may be the key that unlocks the whole. The world is full of mysteries, but none withstands the patient application of reason. We sat in companionable silence for a time, the fire crackling, snow whispering against the window, the city's distant sounds muffled by the winter night. The coffee grew cold in its cup. The tobacco smoke thinned to nothing. Another case closed, another chain complete. Until the next chain forges, dear listener. The game continues.